Welcome to the Pick Six Podcast. It's a Super Friends reunion, Breach. That's right. I'm Ryan Wilson. That's John Breach. You haven't seen us together in quite a while, but that's okay. Today, it's the latest edition of the Pick Six All 32, our look at every team around the NFL before the start of the old regular season. And today we are talking Detroit Lions. And to help us with that, Nolan Bianchi, the Lions beat reporter for the Detroit News, Michigan born and bred. Look, Noah, I know you're in the thick of things at training camp. I know it's hot, apparently, but I want to start with the important stuff. So you tweeted the other day that you were thinking about catching the old Angels-Tigers game on your day off. You decided not to, and Shohei Ohtani did what all he did was pitch a one-hit shutout, and then in the second game of the doubleheader, hit 2 home runs. How are you feeling about those life choices?
I'm pretty devastated. Like as a sports fan, like I just have a general rule that like you should just try and see greatness whenever possible. And especially when it's that accessible and cheap. Like I don't know how much tickets were, but they couldn't have been more than like $20 to get in the door for 2 games. But I got the chance to randomly cover a game each in the Braves and Padres series like over the last month. And Acuna hit a 460-foot home run. It was the longest home run I've ever seen in person. And I was like, well, that was awesome. And then so when Soto came, I was like, okay, like remember that, pay attention to every pitch. And then Soto hit one that was like 463. So like he just cleared it. And I was like, well, that's why you come to the ballpark. You never know what's going to happen. And yesterday I didn't know it was going to happen, but I've been watching a lot of Tigers. I could have surmised that a complete game, 1-hit shut job and a 2 homer performances was on the table. And I just overlooked it.
And now those Ohtani ticket stubs are going to be selling for $15,000 on eBay in like 4 years.
Breach,
exactly.
Breach, you're pretty good about taking advantage of sporting events that aren't football related in your spare time, aren't you?
All the time. Hey, man, I'm going to a Women's World Cup in 2 weeks.
You are?
I'm going off the grid.
Yeah,
so,
see,
I love doing that stuff.
Breach is your that's you in 15 years if you play your cards right, Nolan. Be like Breach. Don't miss out on sporting events when you get the chance. All right, before we get into this thing, remember you can watch us on YouTube at NFL on CBS. Subscribe to the old podcast on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And leave a 5-star review if you're so inclined. And by the way, Breach, you know this, but Nolan may not. I do a little draft podcast with Rick Spielman with the first pick. You can check that out also at NFL on CBS and subscribe to that and do all those other things. All right, let's get to it. Let's do this. We got to start with Jared Goff, Nolan, because I don't think anyone would have surmised a few years ago when he was traded from Sean McVay's offense to Detroit that things would turn out the way they did. And I don't even think it's much of an argument to say he outplayed Matthew Stafford last year, and it wasn't even close. You could argue Matthew Stafford was injured. I get all that. But I think one of the takeaways is that, yeah, we know about Sean McVay, but Ben Johnson, the offensive coordinator, has done a fantastic job, and he's going to be a head coach very soon. So I want to get your thoughts on Jared Goff, number one. I think he's the best quarterback in the division. I think he might be one of the best quarterbacks in the NFC. And when I say might be one of the best, I mean Billy's guy, Jalen Hurts, is number one. And then after that, we got to have a conversation. So where are you and Jared Goff, and what are the expectations going into this season?
Well, I don't necessarily disagree, and I think that this is an offense that's kind of been built to suit him, and that was obviously by design. Like that is, to get the most out of your players, you kind of got to, do what they're good at and take all that into consideration. But I think really what you've got right now is an offense where players' input is valued super highly, and Jared Goff's input is valued super highly. And I think that that's allowed them to kind of grow together. I think Ben Johnson did a lot of growing last year. I think Jared Goff did a lot of growing last year. And definitely, I think that that's something that can be built on going into next season. I think Brad Holmes said around the draft, it's a lot harder to get better at quarterback than it is to get worse. And Jared Goff got better at quarterback last year. So there's no reason to believe that he might be able to take a similar, I don't want to say similar type of jump because he was already playing so well, but like just the consistency week in and week out for 18 straight weeks, I don't think is out of question at all.
Breach, let me ask you before you ask your question, where would you rank Jared Goff in the NFC? And the candidates are Jalen Hurts, Kirk Cousins, Dak Prescott, Stafford, Derek Carr, and my guy, Eugene Smith III.
If I'm doing this based on projections going into 2024, so let's forget about last season or what they've done in their career, just how I think they will play in 2023 in the upcoming season. Obviously, Jalen Hurts at 1, like you just said. But man, it feels like Jared Goff is a top 3 quarterback. And if you want to be completely crazy, you could put him at number 2, but I think I would have him at number 3 at the minimum. So Nolan, what do you think?
Again, I don't disagree. And I think like the numbers and the production kind of proved that at the end of last season. And I think a lot of people will point to the season before where he necessarily wasn't as good for a solid, 10, 12 games or whatever it was. And then you can point to last season and say, the offense was putting up points through those first 7 games when they were 1-6, but he was turning the ball over. And that was true. But I think what really the most powerful thing that has happened to him over the last half of the season last year is the fact that I think, stopped feeling like he had to do everything. I think he finally stopped feeling like he had to do too much. And he could just play football exactly the way it was drawn up. And when he is in a position where he can do that, he's a very accurate passer. He can, he thinks the game very well. And again, like I don't see any reason why we can't be sitting here a year from now and say, wow, okay, Jared Goff, he had an even better year than he had the year before.
Now, this could be a yes or no question, or you can add a little bit more context if you want. Jared Goff, his contract expires after the 2024 season. Do you think Goff is the starting quarterback for the Lions in 2025?
That's a super tough question to answer right now. I would say yes, because I think, what they're going to do with Hendon Hooker, they kind of been transparent through this throughout, is they're, essentially going to let this year be a redshirt year for him. And who knows, what that'll actually mean and what that'll look like for him down the road. But, I don't see any way where, Jared Goff plays at or better than the same level he did last year. And then the team goes, okay, we might want to move on from him. And they might, that kind of happened with the Kansas City Chiefs and Alex Smith and Patrick Mahomes, but that was Patrick Mahomes. That was a team that hadn't won anything. And I think if Jared Goff can win something this year, be it a playoff game, be it the division, be it literally anything, I think that's enough to kind of keep that momentum going and keep those good vibes rolling. Because I think right now, Ben Johnson, Jared Goff, they love working together. And, obviously Ben Johnson possibly leaving might change some things, but I think Jared Goff is very comfortable here in Detroit. And I think Brad Holmes likes him a lot.
All right, let's move on to the guys that Jared Goff is going to be throwing to. Obviously, we all know Amon-Ra St. Brown is the number 1 guy in Detroit. He has been absolutely phenomenal. But then when you go down the depth chart, Jameson Williams obviously suspended for the first 6 games. So who do you think emerges as kind of the number 2 receiver behind St. Brown through those first 6 weeks without Williams on the field?
Well, it wouldn't surprise me at all if Sam Laporta kind of jumps in and he becomes a big target right away. His chemistry with Jared Goff so far in training camp and what we've seen of the offseason program seems to be on point. Goff trusts him a lot. And so it wouldn't really surprise me if he kind of jumped out there. And I know that's a tight end, but I just think that they're building this offense to not necessarily be positionless football, but I think you have a lot of guys who can just do whatever. And so you're not going to necessarily need to say, okay, you need X amount of yardage out of, your wide receivers in this game, because I think you're going to be able to kind of get it from a lot of different areas. And Khalif Raymond is still a guy who he's a little bit bottom of the depth chart. Josh Reynolds, but guys who have been around for like 2 or 3 years in this system, and they've kind of stuck around and they've made big plays every time they were given the opportunity. But it's a great question, because it's something that somebody mentioned to me earlier today was, you look at this team and they added Chark, they added J-Mo last season. You're like, okay, this might be a position of strength for them. And now you kind of feel like it's flipped and it might be the weakest position group in the offense. I think it is, actually.
All right, Nolan, let's take a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to talk about maybe one of my favorite players on this entire roster. And he happens to be a rookie right after this. All right, Nolan. We talked about Jamo a little bit there. Do you call him Jamo or Jamo? I was sort of like Jamo.
I've been going with Jamo, nice A.
Yeah.
But I'm Italian. I don't know if that, plays into anything. Or...
Well, you also work there, so you're probably better informed than I am. I'm just making up stuff. But here's the thing. So you talked about Sam Laporta, the rookie. And by the way, Brad Holmes and Dan Campbell and that front office and coaching staff, they crushed the draft. I think in the moment, it felt like, okay, this is crazy. No one on planet Earth saw them taking Jahmyr Gibbs, 12th overall, second running back after Bijan, that high. Like some people thought he might be a late first round pick. But in retrospect, and sort of the more you thought about it, the more it made sense. And you talked about, and Breach's question asked you about who might be number 2 after Amon-Ra St. Brown. Well, J-Mo's doing the suspension there. And immediately came to mind my guy, Jahmyr Gibbs. Like he could end up being that guy in much the same way Alvin Kamara was the second leading receiver on the team last year after Chris Olave in New Orleans because Mike Thomas wasn't healthy, right? And I feel like there could be a similar sort of evolution in Detroit, but with the understanding that when Williams comes back, he's going to be 100% and he'll be raring to go and he'll immediately be sort of a Devontae Smith type, I feel like, in that offense. What are the expectations for what Jahmyr Gibbs brings? And we talked to him at the combine and he said, I compare myself to Christian McCaffrey. And I think that's pretty on point. McCaffrey might be a little bigger. I think he is. But in terms of the athleticism and the versatility, I think it makes that Ben Johnson offense even much more difficult to defend.
No, I think you're completely correct out of all of that. And that's something that I was saying to people kind of right after the draft is, a lot of people had the reactionary take of like, oh, he's just like Swift. But like, people love Swift. They were high on Swift, whatever. He was an electrifying player at times. But like, I think when you just look at the complete player, like he brings so much to this offense that I really agree with you that the only comparison might be Christian McCaffrey because nobody else like has that breakaway speed like that. And I think that that's really what separates him is the fact that when he does hit that hole, we used to see with DeAndre Swift here, he would hit the hole, he would get about, 30 yards. And then all of a sudden somebody's going to track him down. And I'm really interested to see what happens with Jahmyr Gibbs when he gets out in space, because this is an offense that has been designed around speed. Amon-Ra has speed. Jameson Williams has speed. And now you add, one of the quickest, shiftiest guys to come out of the draft in a long, long time. And they haven't been shy about how they're going to use him in all those different ways. I think like Brad Holmes is reluctant to even call him a running back so far, which will be interesting when it comes time for him to get paid. But he literally just keeps calling him a weapon. He's a weapon. He's not a running back. He's a weapon. And obviously, at the end of the day, he is a running back. He's going to get his touches, but like, I think that you will see him in a lot of different ways. It wouldn't surprise me if there were games where he played more slot receiver than he carried the ball, and he's a fascinating guy.
Hey, Breach, I was at the Alabama Pro Day and to see Bryce, me and Rick were there, and watching Jahmyr go through his running back workout, it was one of those things where like, okay, this is different to see in person. We hadn't yet gone to see the Kentucky workout, the running back there, Chris Rodriguez. Chris Rodriguez was playing a different sport when you saw his workout compared to what Jahmyr Gibbs did. And I think no one is running down Jahmyr Gibbs in the open field. If that happens, they will be wind assisted and perhaps rocket assisted because that guy is an absolute missile.
I can't wait till 4 years from now, Wilson, when they hit him with the franchise tag as a running back. And he's like, no, you're tagging me as the weapon. And that's $47 million per year. So I'll sign that one.
I've been thinking about that a lot, just like how, and at like, again, 4 or 5 years down the road, so many things, the entire landscape of the NFL can change. But like, is he going to get paid somewhere in the middle? Like, how is that going to end up going? Because like he has so much evidence to back up. Like, I'm not a running back. You said many times, I'm not a running back. So yeah. it'll be fun.
Go ahead, Breach.
Let's go to the defensive side of the ball, Wilson. I'll let you go. You got the big defense.
Oh, okay.
You're our defensive guru.
Let's do that. Yeah. So the defense struggled at times last year, and you could see the visible frustration on Aaron Glenn's face, the defensive coordinator. We saw him in Hard Knocks, and you got the sense that he was a badass, and he had expectations that weren't always met, but also it was a really young group. Aiden Hutchinson, I thought, had a great season. They drafted Kirby Joseph, who's going to be a help in the backfield in the secondary. This year, they get Brian Branch, who I thought was a first-round talent, who's going to contribute. I feel like immediately Jack Campbell's now going to pair with Malcolm Rodriguez. So what are the expectations for this team on the defensive side of the ball? We know what the offense can do. We know what Ben Johnson and Jared Goff are going to do based on last season. But if this defense can come together, the team feels like to me it's going to win the division. Something can happen. We know it's only July as we're doing this. But I think if the defense comes together, now we're talking about a legit run once you get to January.
Yeah, well, it's kind of amazing because like that second half of the season, their defense was like it was average, like, which is exactly like if they would have just had an average defense all along, they would have made the playoffs. But the way they were playing defense at the beginning of the year was so horrific that like the final end of year stats here, you got like the 30, 31st, 23rd, where they're ranking, like none of those categories could be made up. That's how bad they were through those first
Right.
7 games. And I think that coincided with a lot of growth. And like, it might sound cliche, but I do think that like you had a lot of young guys last year who didn't necessarily, I don't want to say recognize their opportunity or whatever it may be, but I think you go back to when they fired their cornerbacks coach Aubrey Pleasant after week 7, and they had this defensive meeting where a bunch of the veterans on this team who had kind of been phased out by these young guys, Michael Brockers being one of them, called a team meeting and he was like, guys, like your actions have consequences. Like, we're all family here, and like you need to fight for each other and you need to think about those things. You can't just be out there playing football. And from that point on, I think you saw a legitimate change in the way that this defense played. And obviously you would have liked to see them playing that well all along, but I think you do have a little bit of a cop out there where I can't remember who put this stat. I think it might have been Pro Football Insiders. But they were not just like a young defense per snaps. Like they were one of the youngest defense in 25 years in the NFL. And you saw so much growth. You saw the Aiden Hutchinson, you saw James Houston come on late. You saw Kirby Joseph, Ed Reading, Aaron Rodgers in the final game of the season twice. And it just, yeah, you have a lot of optimism. They got veterans, I thought, where they needed to get veterans at cornerback. They got Cam Sutton. They got Emmanuel Mosley. Who knows if he'll be ready by week 1. I think they're a little optimistic that he'll be able to, but he's still a little banged up right now. But I think that they really just kind of plugged all of the major holes and the unknowns, like, defensive tackle and linebacker, who not necessarily an unknown, but you don't necessarily know who's going to be starting there right now. I think is going to be something that can really elevate this team. And like I said, if they're just average, that should be enough. That should be enough to win the division.
Well, and if they're going to be average, I think a big part of that is going to have to be the improvement of their secondary. We just saw those numbers up there. They gave up the 3rd most pass yards, the 2nd highest yards per attempt, but they have totally revamped the secondary. I mean, obviously we saw Jeff Okudah traded, Mike Hughes is gone, Deshaun Elliott is gone. There is no one's there except Kirby Joseph. And you mentioned Cam Sutton, Emmanuel Mosley. How much improvement do you think the Lions will see out of that secondary?
A ton. I think that the CJ Gardner-Johnson signing was maybe the most underrated signing of their offseason. Like,
by the way, Nolan, huge. What's the word? Dodged a bullet that he's healthy.
That was one of the weirdest things I've ever been a part of. I was sure that man's knee was shredded. Like and everybody was. Like, people who've worked there, like, decades and covering NFL football have been like, I've never seen anything like that, where a player was like that catastrophically injured. Like, he went right to his knee. He was screaming. He was crying. He got carted off. Guys were coming over, hugging him. It's going to be all right, man. And then Tom P tweeted like a half hour later, quote, he's fine. And we were all just laughing. Like, how could that possibly be? And then sure enough, he's fine.
By the way, sorry to interrupt you, Nolan. You can finish your thought, but Breach is a lifelong Bengals fan. He pulled a Joe Burrow, basically.
Yes, exactly. Getting carted off for a calf strain. That's just one way to stress everybody
Sorry
out,
about
Joe. But no, I really do think that like his presence on this defense is going to add so much, because you kind of look at it like that was maybe the last hole that needed plugging, is that nickel position. Like, you got Will Harris, who was probably going to start there up until they signed CJ Gardner-Johnson, or maybe up until they've drafted Brian Branch. But last year you're kind of looking at the secondary like, I wonder if Mike Hughes can make a difference here. And it's just like, it feels so far removed from, I guess, what you're looking to see, what fans are hoping to see in just a year's time. And I do think another year of Kirby Joseph, Tracy Walker being healthy. He wasn't healthy all last year. And then being able to play Gardner-Johnson at a more natural position for him is just going to do wonders for this team. And I can't wait to see how it looks.
All right, Nolan, I'm going to try and throw you off with a quick question about kickers. There's nothing I love more in training camp than a kicker battle. And Detroit has one going on right now. What's your prediction? Who wins the job? Is it John Parker Romo? Is it Riley Patterson? Or do you think they go with Choi C and bring in someone else who gets cut in another kicking battle?
Man, since Dan Campbell has been brought on, I can't remember how many it was, but I had to do a story when they cut Badgley, and I was going through all the kickers they had. There were names in there that I've never heard of, or names that are in there that I only recognize from that one game day. Eldrick Rosas, Dominic Eberle, just like the most random names ever. But I think it's going to be Riley Patterson in the end. Like they just keep finding each other, these two star-crossed lovers, and they like it was a general consensus that Badgley had the pun intended leg up on the competition here, and then out of nowhere he just gets cut, and it's like, oh, okay, they must really like Riley Patterson. They gave up a draft pick for him to get him before he hit waivers. Like, I think Romo is brought in to maybe push him, but ultimately I think they really like Riley Patterson.
All right, Breach, why don't you ask your last question, then we'll go do some odd stuff, because that sort of goes into some questions I have.
All right, well, let's just cut to the chase here. The Detroit Lions, Nolan, as you, I'm sure, are well aware, have not won a playoff game since 1991. 1991. There are probably people listening who were not even alive the last time the Detroit Lions.
Was no one alive then?
I was not alive.
Yeah.
I was
no one
5 years away. 5 years away.
No one was not alive the last time the Lions won a playoff game. So is this the year the drought finally ends?
I think it is. And I think if it doesn't, this season is a failure. And I think it's okay to say that. I think everybody in that building believes that right now. It's super interesting. Like, there's never been anticipation like there is right now, just across the entire city. Like, people, my dad, just have been watching the Lions for 50, 60, 70 years. Like,
Yikes.
truly, like this is a feeling they've never experienced. And they haven't won anything, which makes it really interesting. They still haven't made the playoffs under Dan Campbell yet. But like, I have likened this upcoming season to like a very religious person about to find out if their religion is real, like get definitive proof, because it's like, if it's not Dan Campbell, then who is it? And like,
right.
the lifelong Lions haters who have lived around here, like, he's got everybody bought in. Like, people are like, oh, I haven't watched the Lions in 20 years. He's got me hooked back in. And so I think so. Yes. And I think if they don't, it's a failure. And I think that they would probably agree with that.
No, I agree. And I said this when Dan Campbell was hired. I didn't know if he was great in terms of X's and O's, but he was someone you would run through a wall for, and it feels like the team has sort of bought into that. And Billy, you're reading my mind here. So we're going to go right to the odds. The Lions started 1-6 last year. They ripped off 8 of their last 10 to finish. What's the math on that? 9-8. I did graduate from college at some point. But here's
shout out William and Mary.
Shout out William and Mary. Yeah, don't brag.
Colby Sorsdahl.
Colby Sorsdahl. I think everyone on this.
No Colby Sorsdahl questions from the.
I know. I think everyone in that draft class. I think Colby might be the tough, longest odds to make the roster, but I think this draft class is so good that all those guys could end up being on the final 53 at some point. Yeah. But in terms of the NFC North odds, if you're watching on YouTube, Caesars has the Lions as a favorite, plus 120. All plus numbers. Then it's the Vikings, Bears, and Packers. I mean, if I'm the Packers, I'm embarrassed that the Bears ahead of me. But let me ask you, how good do you feel about the Lions' chances of winning this division?
I feel like they're pretty good. Like, I feel like that is what the odds are saying right now is probably accurate. I think what makes it interesting is like, I feel like the other 3 teams are completely unknown entities. I feel like you can kind of confidently say that maybe, the Bears might need another year, but who knows if Justin Fields becomes that guy. Like, it's very possible that they win the division. I'm super interested to see what the Packers do this season, but I think like all of these teams in some way, and this probably isn't fair to them, but they're all the same team. Like, they all have the same kind of like range of volatility that they could all hit. Like, it wouldn't surprise me if any of those teams won 5 games. It wouldn't surprise me if any of those teams won 11 games. And I think that is more than anything what makes the upcoming season so interesting for the Lions is how hard is this division going to be? Because Dan Campbell he's been great within the division. I think he swept 5-1 against the division last year, and I think he had a winning record against the division the year before. So, I'm very, very curious to see what happens with these other NFC North teams, and I honestly have no idea what's going to happen.
Breach, are you in the Kirk Cousins bandwagon, or are you buying in Dan Campbell and company?
That Kirk Cousins bandwagon always crashes, and I just don't want to ride it anymore, Wilson. The Lions look awesome. I'm just afraid to pick a team that has a total 7-decade track record of failing everyone.
You sound like a Bengals
I
fan.
grew up a Bengals fan. I know all about not being able to win a playoff game for 3 decades, but it does feel like that this is the era, as no one was saying. So I will be disappointed for Lions fans if they don't finally get that monkey off their back.
All right,
and
one more for you.
If I can add real quick,
oh, yeah, go ahead.
to that point, like, would you say that the reason that the Bengals finally were able to shake all of it, they shook all of it, all the allegations, they got to the Super Bowl, they won those playoff games, they won on the road, they beat Patrick Mahomes. I don't think there's anything that you can say that is carried over from those years. Would you agree that it's all because of Joe Burrow and his mentality?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And that's kind of, you can play the Dan Campbell card. I definitely see the similarities there. You just need to change the personality of the team, because it's always been, oh, no, here we go again. They're going to bungle it up. And I feel like, the Lions very similar.
And it's a lot of those guys too. St. Brown, he's a freak. Penei Sewell, he's a freak. When it comes to that, just I'm a psycho, I'm a winner. I'm not letting that doubt creep in. And I think that's ultimately what you need, is that doubt to just go away in those moments where they creep in.
Yeah, no, that's right. And there's a story that we'll tell you at some other point before Joe Burrow got there and the Steelers and the Bengals played in the playoffs. The Vontez perfect game. That's a sad story if you're Breach. Happy story if you're me, Steelers fans. But those are bygone days. One last thing for you, Nolan. We're looking here at the 2023 Offensive Rookie of the Year. Bijan's plus 300. He's at the top, which makes sense, followed by Bryce Young and CJ. Also makes sense there. But then, sitting there, number 4, Jahmyr Gibbs, plus 700. And again, I think if we have an Alvin Kamara type breakout, and that's a huge ask, but I think he's not playing quarterback. He's playing a position where he'll get the ball early and often, and he'll be on the field a lot. There's a chance for Jahmyr Gibbs to be a difference maker, I feel like.
Well, and they need him, like we kind of already touched on. They were expecting to have Jameson Williams through these first couple of games, and now it's okay, well, we need that speed to come from somewhere. And I think, on top of him having a fantastic offensive line, him being in an offense that's coached by Ben Johnson, plus 700, it seems like pretty good value to me for my money.
Breach, what do you think?
I love it. I think he's going to be a huge part of that offense. It's always tough to beat out a quarterback, though, because if Bryce Young plays and they win just 7 games, that could be enough to put him over the top. Same with CJ Stroud, especially how bad the Texans were last year.
Yeah, but those quarterbacks can't throw 25 interceptions and the team still win. They have to do something, right?
I mean, didn't Kyler Murray win a couple of years ago on a bad team? I mean, it's just possible because the quarterback touches the ball all the time, and the teams were bad last year, and all you got to do is improve a little bit. But like Nolan just said, plus 700 is, as Brinson would say also, I'd sprinkle a little. I'll do a
little.
Yeah.
All right. Nolan Bianchi, Detroit News, thank you so much for your time, man. I know you're incredibly busy. Thank you for putting on a clean shirt for us. I know it's a little steamy there in Michigan. And remember, you can watch the Pick Six podcast on YouTube at NFL on CBS. Subscribe to the old podcast on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you get your podcast. Leave us a 5-star review. Nolan, thanks again. Breach, good seeing you, and we'll see you guys later.
Cool. Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.